Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this time we're going to be talking about some books, and I have the perfect guest, my friend Aaron, who is also an avid reader. So we're going to be ranking our top three favorite fiction books. So if you want to check out some of our other thoughts on books, we did a sci-fi one earlier. So check out that episode and shameless plugs all around. But Aaron, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be back.
Absolutely. And ladies first. So if you'd like to get started, so what's your first book?
Okay, so the first book was one I read this year.
Okay.
Oh my God, it was so good. I haven't read that good of a fiction book in a long time. It's called The Huntress by Kate Quinn. It's about a female pilot on the Russian side in World War II. So it was just, and then they're chasing down Nazis after World War II. So it's one of those ones that kind of flips back and forth on time period. Just by like, I think it was like 5 or 6 years or so. And they are tracking down um also a female villain. So I won't give too much away in case anybody is interested in reading it. But I highly, highly recommend. I mean, it made me want to go and dig through a bunch of Kate Quinn books because it was just such a good story.
I don't think I've read any of her books, but as you're talking, I'm adding stuff to my to get list. So there you go. And
A lot
that's the wonderful thing that you all can do. If you haven't read any of the books that we talk about, add them to your to read list
TBR list.
and
TBR.
get them and then add them to the giant pile of books that you haven't read, because are you really a reader if you don't have a giant pile of books that you really need to catch up on?
Really not.
Really not. That sounds really interesting. And you know it's always interesting because like so many like books and movies and shows and stuff like that are done about World War II, and
Yeah.
this seems like it's something that's not overdone.
It was so different. I can't agree with you more. Where I've read a ton of World War II books, and I like a lot of them because I mean
Mhm.
it's very hard to. Everyone has a slightly different story. It's very hard to get sick of those stories, but I do have to space them out.
Uh-huh.
But yes, to your point, exactly. You nailed it. It was just very different. I'd never read that perspective before.
Yeah, because I watched well, and this is the awkward thing because like I watched a film that was like about a Russian pilot earlier this year, and the PR people are like, "We understand if you need to pull your review because like then Russia invaded Ukraine, and then it's just like, well, that's awkward."
Please
And
don't. No Russian pilots, please.
yeah, and it's sometimes life just throws wrench in things, but like that sounds like a really interesting book. And have you read any more of Kate Quinn's books?
Yeah, I read one other one, and this is just like a interesting side tangent that I'll be really quick about. It was good, but it unfortunately it wasn't as good as The Huntress,
Mhm.
I feel. It's called The Alice Network, and it's so unfortunate when you read such a good book because you do, right? You go and chase down that author because you're like, oh my God, all of them must be like so amazing, and your expectations are just like
Mhm.
up here. And so it's unfortunate because I think objectively it was a good book. I just like wanted the same feeling and I wanted the
Mhm.
same type of story and all of that, and it was just different, but and also still set in it divvied between World War I and World War II on this one.
Interesting.
So yeah.
So it seems like she kind of has a sweet spot
Me-
there.
Yeah, yeah,
There you go.
a
Which
little bit.
I'll have to admit, so my list, two of them are going to be a little familiar with each other because, like, I tried really hard to stick this to like straight up fiction that like I wouldn't outwardly say like, oh, this is like a horror book or this is a fantasy book, and then I'm like, well, I got to save those for when we do that. Um, so like, and I really wanted to shake things up for my three picks, but like it wound up just turning out that I picked two books from the same author.
And I'm
Because
like,
so my number three is The Road. by
So,
Cormac McCarthy.
uh, yes.
So I don't think there's an author out there that could write so beautifully about such horrific things. And I remember just sitting there reading The Road. I'm like, this is beautiful writing, but
Mhm.
like, my God, this is messed up.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like, it's a post-apocalyptic kind of book too, and like, in I could have might be a stretch just calling it straight fiction novel, but like, there's just something, one, like I mentioned, beautiful about the writing, and something very poetic about it.
Hmm.
And then it's just such an affecting experience reading this book. And basic idea is just it's a father and a son. Nobody has names because, this is a time where it's just like you don't need names. The world has fallen, and basically you're just trying to survive. And this dynamic between this father and son is so meaningful and poignant, and it's so interesting everyone that they meet along the way. And also some of the things they see along the way, which I wish I could unread
Agreed.
on
I will
some
do it.
level,
Yes.
because Cormac McCarthy doesn't pull punches
Nope.
in his writing and his stories that he tells. And, it's a tragic story, but every character that pops up leaves an impression on you, no
Hmm.
matter how small of a role that they have. It's just great characters, great story, and just so poetically written. And it's why probably Cormac McCarthy is my favorite American author. It's 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 just something else reading his books. And spoiler alert, you're gonna get some more. So there's The Road.
I Road is the only one I've read by Cormac McCarthy. But it's so good. It was amazing. I actually think I might read No Country for Old Men here soon. And I have one question for you on The Road, because I might read No Country for Old Men because my boyfriend just read it and loved
Okay.
it. Couldn't put it down. But he read The Road, and we kind of have been debating this. And I don't think this question gives too much away, but you tell me if you think differently. But did you think that the ending was sad or hopeful? Because I felt sad, but my boyfriend felt hopeful.
It, the ending's challenging. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is I saw the film first,
Oh, yeah.
by, I think it's director John Hillcoat. And like Viggo Mortensen's in it, and like there's a great cast for all these like random characters throughout. But like, and this is one of those pieces of great casting too in the film, because not to give too much away, but there's a man at the end of the story, and it's just like, do you trust him? And the casting in the film was so great because it's the kind of actor where it's like, I could see him as somebody who's like a horrible person who's going to do terrible things to this kid, or I could see him as like a potential new father figure for this kid. I'm like, damn it. And it's one of
Yes.
those kinds of things where it's just like, it's hard to feel hopeful with this story in general,
That's
honestly.
what I, that was my problem.
And
See where it was hopeful, but I struggled because I was already down from the whole story in general. Yeah.
I think the ending's very poetic to go
Hmm.
along with the journey that you go on, because it's just an endless road
Hmm.
of like, where's the end? And what
Yeah.
is the end to this existence?
Yep.
And it brings up like a really deep human piece of human nature about like, do you live to live, or do you live to thrive?
Yeah.
And is this a world where you're even capable of thriving anymore? Because I feel like every single character that you come along in the story is just surviving.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what's the point
Hmm.
at that point?
Yes. Like
And I
that
think that says a
again.
lot about you as a person and your
Yep.
outlook on life. Because I guess that's the thing, because like, it is hopeful if I guess you see it as this kid now has somebody else to potentially help him survive. But it's not so hopeful and just sad that, like,
This is their
what was
life.
the point
Yeah, this is
of
their,
all
but
of it?
still going to be hard, you know?
And that's it. It's always going to be hard.
And I
There's
think that's,
no,
yeah.
there's no like, I don't think there's a traditional hopeful light.
Mm-mm.
There's no light at the end of this tunnel. There's no light at the end of this road. It's just, it keeps
The
going.
road. Yeah, it's just the road. Like,
And it's sad. It is a very sad book. Okay, just a trigger warning for people. This is not a happy book. So if
mm-mm.
you don't like being sad or like downer kinds of reads, don't read this. So,
Very, very
but
fair to
like,
put that
if you
warning.
can appreciate it for how beautifully written this is and how impactful the story, and like, look at all we just talked about. Like, there's so much to dig into here. It's that kind of book. And honestly, I'd rather read something like that than just like something that, oh, this was fun and
Yeah.
sweet and just like, I'd rather have a full meal than eat some cotton candy. So
Yes.
honestly, that's the kind of thing that, and like, the road's a full meal and it's a heavy one
Then some.
and then some. But Aaron, what's your next one?
So my next one, and we may have a little bit to talk about with this because I read it when the TV show got really popular. So the book then got more popular too. Um, is Normal People by Sally Rooney.
Oh, I did add that to my reading of my book list after I watched that show.
Okay, so I haven't watched the show. I'm very much, I think we've talked about this. I probably said it on my last one. I'm very much like a book or TV show slash movie person. So I read the book, so I haven't watched the show.
Uh-huh.
Raves about the show, of course, right? But this was actually a book. It was so good, and I never do this. It was so good that my roommate lent me her copy to read. I finished the book and I went out and bought my own copy
There you
because
go.
I was like, it was just, and it was a fast read. Like it's a book, it's probably only like that big.
Mhm.
I think I read it in a weekend. It was so, just so good. It's so impactful. It's similar to The Road. Like it just, they're young people. They fall in love, but they're from very different social circles. So
Yeah.
it's one is hiding the relationship, doesn't really want to acknowledge it, doesn't really, and they separate for college and then they come
Mhm.
back together. And, it's just, it's a tug and pull, and you can maybe oversimplify it. It's a love story, but there's just so many other elements to it that just make it very thought provoking. It's very provocative.
Mhm.
She just wrote it so well. I mean, I was hooked by the characters. I just can't say enough good things about it.
As you're talking, I'm trying to double check if I actually added this to my list because if I didn't, then nope, I didn't. Um, I because like I want to read the book so bad after
Oh, it's so
watching that show because if the show is even a fraction of how good this book is, it's a must read.
yeah.
Because
Oh, yes.
like obviously I can't contribute too much about the actual book because I haven't read the book yet, but when I wound up watching Normal People, I remember it very distinctly because it was spring 2020
Mm-hmm.
and I was working from home. I still lived next to Ryder's campus. So I'm like sitting in my room doing nothing because like the last 4 weeks of that semester were like a joke. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get through the rest of it. And like, when I'm just doing grunt work and just like clicking through Excel documents and stuff, like I'll throw a show on them. Like
I'll just
I couldn't stop watching it. Like the character, like they are two fully realized people. Like
yes.
so fully realized, and you connect with them on such a deep personal level. And as somebody that like calling it a romance, I feel like is pigeonholing it into something.
Yes. Understand.
But like, it's
Yes.
obviously about a relationship between two
Yeah.
people, and there's very few relationships in a show that I felt like, oh my God, I feel so invested in this.
Yes.
And I don't know how like the book ends or anything like that, but just what I'll say is like I appreciate this story doesn't feel like it has to force feed you a feel good, easy ending
Hmm.
that you would expect. And I think it's very real. It's
Hmm.
very human and realistic. And, it depends on the kind of person you are. Because, like, I know people are just like, well, I don't want that. I don't want to live real life. That's why I'm watching a show or reading a book and stuff like that.
Right.
But,
I
like,
want that ending, which is me a lot of the time, but this one was just so good because it was different. Yes.
well, yeah. And I feel like this story is so well written and so fleshed out and so real
Yeah.
that like no matter how it was going to end, I felt like I went on this journey with these two people, and I feel like that's the reward of like going through the story is the experience of what these two people go through.
Yes. And it's just, and they're, to your point, they're very realized and they're very, I felt connected to both of them. I
Mhm.
mean, like I understood the thought process and emotions behind both of them. And I just, it was very, very good.
And if a story can do that, where, because, I appreciate a good story that shows people at odds with each other and it not being just like, not to pick on, not to pick on like holiday rom-coms,
Hmm.
but like if I have to see another story where it's just like a big city girl who's a working woman comes to a small town and it's like this fit, rugged guy and just they hate each other. I'm like, that feels contrived conflict. But like
Hmm.
this, like there's a real human things and like relationships are complicated.
Very,
And
very.
I feel like normal people is so mature in the way that
Yes.
it looks at relationships and realizing it's like, look, this is gonna sound very anti-romantic, but like love's not enough.
Yeah.
There's so many pieces that go into a relationship. There's the love, obviously, you want to have that, and
Would be nice.
yeah, it's much better to start your relationship there than for other reasons.
Right.
Contrary to history, but like that love, you also need to find like making it work financially, making it work where you're in the same place, you're at the same place with each other, and your motivations and what you want out of life line up because you can still have this connection. And I feel like this story delves into that more than most relationship stories that you're going to read in a book or watch in a show.
Yeah.
And oh, that show like on Hulu just like blew up. And I was so
So
glad that
much.
I watched it.
Yeah. I think that's what got me into the book was the show. And it just, and I loved the point you made at the top where it was the maturity of the show. Maybe not necessarily the characters, but of the way it was
Yeah.
portrayed was just very, very well done.
Well, and that's a part of it is like they have to grow up
Yeah.
and go through all those things. And the story is, like you said, mature enough to show us what it
All
really
of it.
means to go
Yeah.
through all of that. Now, what's really funny is I tried to keep stone face when you mentioned No Country for Old Men. So, a little bit
Yep.
of backstory. So, these are the two books that I've read of Cormac McCarthy. I have Blood Meridian on my list to get.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's like All My Pretty Horses or something like
I
that.
just got that for Matt for Christmas.
Oh, they do.
Yep.
So I still need to read that one as well. But so just a little backstory. So, like most of these books, I've seen the films first, and I remember my brother and his friend were over, and they had like Encore on, like
Mhm.
I think that's like a subset of Stars. They're just like premium movie channels back when I think this was I was home for the summer between one of my years of college, and they just had this on, and I'm like, what is this? And 18-year-old Shane didn't really process this story very well. And it's challenging because, like, it's not for 18-year-olds to understand. And as I've grown older, the 13 years since I watched this for the first time, this is one of my favorite films. It's one of my top 10 favorite films, and it's one of my favorite books. I read this. My experience of reading this book was so great because it was during the summer.
Mhm.
And during the summer, I actually take breaks at work because I have the time to. During the semester, it's tough. I'm just
Yeah.
running all over the place.
Yeah.
And what I like to do on my breaks is take a walk around campus for half of it, and then sit on a bench behind the library looking out on the lake on campus. It's a very nice view, it's peaceful. And I'm just sitting there reading this book, and all I can do is, because how the book is structured, the beginning of each chapter has Sheriff Tom Bell telling a story.
Yeah.
And he's played by Tommy Lee Jones in the film, and they only do one of his stories in the film, which makes
Mm.
sense because it's a film and you don't need to be having somebody telling stories every
Time.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the opening of the book, like the opening of the film is one of his stories, and I think it's the first story that he tells in the book. And I'm reading through this book every time one of those interludes comes up, and I'm just in my head like Tommy Lee Jones sitting there reading the story, and I'm just like just hearing his voice because he's so great. He was so perfect, perfect casting, and that's one of the challenges of seeing like a book, like a film before a book is like
Yes.
if it's good, it's hard to get them out of your head when
Yes.
you're reading it. But like this is just perfect because like his deep like West Texas drawl is just so perfect for those stories. And this is a very complicated story because it deconstructs your expectations of
Mm.
what a story is.
Mm-hmm.
It Your hero doesn't come out on top.
Mm-hmm.
Your villain is pure evil, like in a human incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
And you see him interacting with people, and it's basically a reaper. He's
Yeah.
like death, like coming. And it's such amazing imagery. And like the dialogue is so great. And the Coen brothers are my favorite directors. There's something about their writing that just clicks with me.
Yeah.
I feel like we're on the same wavelength in terms of
Mm-hmm.
humor and storytelling. And apparently, how they wrote the screenplay for this was one of them sat there and read out of the book, and the other one just typed it out.
Hmm.
Because why mess up
Something
perfect
so good.
writing?
So great. Yeah.
And I'm sitting there reading this and being like, I'm just picturing this book on the screen because it's so perfectly detailed down to like, not gonna lie, the most gruesome detail because it's
Mm-hmm.
brutal. There is horrible things that happen in this story, and if you want any sense of like how detailed and visual the writing is that Cormac McCarthy has, is reading the very opening of this book and just how you see Anton Chigurh taking his first victim in the book is just so detailed. And it's just
Mm.
like, even if you, I can't even imagine, like, if I didn't see the film, I would be seeing it because
Yeah. As the when you're reading it, yes.
it's so amazing. And it's just such an interesting trio of characters all coming together in this story. And the, it's the, I feel like at the heart of this story is the impending fear that you don't fit in the world anymore.
Mm.
Like the world around you has reached a point that you can't comprehend anymore. You don't know how to fight or keep going in it. And I feel like when I'm like 60 and go back and read this book, this is going to hit on a whole other different kind of level because that's
Yeah.
the challenging thing is great art hits you in a different way at different stages of your life. And this book is so well written, and like the story is so perfect, and realizing that this is a story for an older person, because I feel like the themes are something that you experience through life,
Hmm.
and it wasn't meant for like an 18-year-old to fully grasp what was going on screen or on page. And even just being 31 years old, I probably read this when I was 29,
Hmm.
and being like, something about this clicks different.
Yeah.
And it's one of those kinds of stories. So, like, I just love Cormac McCarthy. And whether it's on the page or on the screen, No Country for Old Men is one of my favorite stories.
Oh, that's good. Okay, keeping it on the list.
There you go. And yet again, it's brutal. This is not basically, if you're reading anything Cormac McCarthy, don't go in
It's don't go
expecting
in thinking it's gonna be happy.
no. That's just, and I promise you, I am a happy person. It
Yeah.
just so happens that I like these brutal, very hopeless stories that can put on the books. So, but Aaron, what's your last one?
Okay, so my last one, I also read about a year ago.
Mhm.
It was so good, so impactful. It's called Faithful, and it's by Alice Hoffman.
Mhm.
So she did Practical Magic. She's done a couple
Okay.
of the Dove Keepers. Yeah, she has a lot of books actually out that she's written, and all the ones I've read of hers are really good. But this one just, I think it's her latest. I think, or at least it was a year ago. Just hit so different. I mean, it was such a personal growth story for the main character. It's a girl, and it's uh I don't think this is pretty upfront. So I mean, I'm giving a little bit away, but you would see it in the first, chapter, two chapters.
Mhm.
Um, she gets in a car accident with her best friend in high school, and to the point where her best friend basically becomes a vegetable, and she survives. And
Mhm.
just the story is all about her basically becoming a person again because she just has so much guilt. I mean, she just drops off from life after that. Like, doesn't, can't really can't really finish school. I mean, she's just, she's depressed. I mean, it's traumatic.
Yeah.
Um, and you just get through every stage of her trying to kind of claw her way back to living again. And it's so good. Another book that's like only like this, big. It's
Yeah.
not a lot. I think I read it in a weekend again. It was very, very good.
Yeah. I've only heard of Practical Magic. I've never actually, because like I'm I know it's a movie. I've never read any of her books though. And for some reason that story sounds very familiar. And I'm trying
Hmm.
to think if this got adapted into something. Or I
Hmm.
don't know if you've told me about this before or not, but like something just like clicked. I'm like, am I having deja vu or something sounds very familiar to this? And
Yeah, maybe.
I'm trying to think. I'm gonna have to ponder that. But it sounds like an interesting story, and you know, any kind of story where you're trying to process some kind of grief or loss or guilt is obviously very relatable, because these are all things that we all feel as people, and
Oh,
trying to
absolutely.
process those things. And if it's well written, and because and that's a really hard challenge too, because they could be done so poorly,
Oh God, yeah.
and be like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody actually said this.
I can't believe somebody submitted this or wrote it down.
Yeah, and it's just like, and because like I know I've definitely watched films where it's like those kinds of themes are tackled, and it's just like,
Hmm. Were they
um
though?
this is very problematic. But like if something like that's done really well and hits emotionally, it's things that we can all experience, because guilt and trying to process something traumatic like that is challenging. So it's made my list.
Yeah, good, good. It was very, very good. I mean, all of her books are pretty good, but yeah, I can't tell you what I mean. That one I just thought about for days. I know you had lifted up all your books, but I actually lent that one out to my sister-in-law because I was like, you have to read it. So
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah, I had my one bookshelf like right there off campus, so it was just like I just grabbed these off of it real quick.
One stop shop.
Actually, no, I didn't find any of these on that bookshelf. I had to walk downstairs real quick. I'm like, Aaron's not on yet. I'm gonna run downstairs real quick, and they're on my other bookshelf because I have one downstairs as well. And that's also where I found my last one, which is this one I've been a fan of since I read this when I was probably in middle school, which is Lord of the Flies.
Oh my God. You picked some brutal books.
I sure did. So it's says a lot about humanity, does it? And maybe
A little
me. I don't know.
bit.
But I remember reading this for the first time, and like I feel like Lord of the Flies is a very interesting story because, as a man reading this as a young man, it's very much targeted at young men. And
Mhm.
like it is interesting because like I don't think my wife likes it much. Like I don't think Jess does. And like I think it would be interesting reading this book as somebody as like as a woman because
Mhm.
like the whole entire idea about this is like, hey, what did if you took a bunch of young posh little brat kids from like a prep school, drop them on an island, and how quickly will they divulge into like the worst of like human nature?
The worst of the worst. Yep. Yep.
And that's really what the story is. And I think it says, which like my two other books, says so much about humanity.
It
And
really
because the
does.
thing is like it's the classic story of, us just eating ourselves. And, I feel like many men with a lot of power in many times in history have made the same horrible decisions and have let society divulge into horrors like this
Oh,
book. And it's so messed up in how accurate it is
mhm.
when people get drunk on a little bit of power.
Yes.
And I think what makes this so impactful is that it's kids.
Hmm.
Because like if you throw a bunch of like adult men onto an island, you're right off the bat, you're like, they're gonna make some horrible decisions and do really messed up things. But like
Yes.
watching these kids
Yep.
and they're and I think it's really important. Like this is a boys' choir,
Hmm.
so like these are kids in a religious school.
Hmm.
These are kids that are young and like high society. You're prim and proper, and then no, that's all a construct. The
Yeah.
second you put them out into the real world, into the wilderness, the gloves come off and it really divulges into the dark sides of human nature. And what's so interesting is like there's been multiple adaptations of this book too. And like I think it's from the 50s, if I'm
Hmm.
not mistaken.
I
I
think.
have that version of the movie. And you have like in classic literature fashion, you have a Christ figure, the one young kid who brutally gets murdered by the rest of these kids, and it's just like you straight up killed this kid, and everyone's like, no. I'm like,
No.
yeah, you did.
And they
Like,
all. Yep. Yep. Oh, I was just about to give away the ending, so I'm not going to. But
I'm just
it's.
like, how'd this kid get beat to death then?
Oh my God. And it's so thought provoking too, right? Where it ends up just asking all these questions. Like, because to your point with it being children, you're just like, so is this nature then? Like, is this what's always going to happen? Like, we're always doomed to repeat this? So it's just very, very fast. Like, those are all the questions that come up for me with that story. Cause I'm just like, yeah, it's just
All I'm gonna say is
very,
justice for Piggy.
yeah. Yeah. Justice for Piggy, please.
As a fat kid growing up, I was not very happy with the treatment of poor Piggy.
Oh,
Uh, which
terrible.
right off the bat, well, I know firsthand, kids are cruel,
Oh, terrible. But
and
these were the like these are the worst of the worst.
oh my god, the main kid of like the hunters. I just
Hmm.
want I want to be on that island and just smack that kid,
Oh my
honestly.
God. You would just,
And
hmm.
it's just like this is bad. This book is just like a whole entire justification for like spanking. It's like I'm gonna
Yeah,
smack the crap out of this kid,
seriously. Well, my other thing, I'm always just like, there was a whole nother book that could have been written about reintegrating these children into society.
right? Well,
Oh my,
that's the thing too, because like book just ends,
yeah. And
and
you're like, that's concerning.
well, yeah, it's just like some of these kids are gonna be CEOs someday.
Yep.
Well, and that I think that is one of the underlying oh crap moments of this
Hmm.
story is that all of these kids had this in them. What are they going to do when they grow up?
Exactly. When they get stronger, more powerful, have more money, like 100%. Yep.
Like all these kids are going to be a bunch of CEOs. They're going to be like police officers,
Hmm.
and it's just like it's such a unfortunate series of events, but
Yeah.
it's such an interesting look. And like I feel like some people like, oh, this is just one of those books that they make you read in school, and it's just like, is this really a good book or not? It's just like this is an old book, but like I have to say, human nature hasn't changed.
Yeah. So good. And such a depiction of like what it again, just so thought provoking. You're like, no, we need to talk about this.
So if you want to see a adult version of Lord of the Flies, you should watch the movie Triangle of Sadness that came out this year.
Oh God.
Oh man, that it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot. So like if you're not prepared to go on like
A journey.
some kind of journey, don't watch Triangle of Sadness. But like I feel like the third act of the movie is a shipwreck. So like it's like really shows these are adults now.
Yeah.
And it's all about the power struggle.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting with some of the characters really trying to keep a
Hmm.
structure, the conch, trying to keep some kind of law and order, like
Yeah.
some kind of governance. And it's just like, no, I don't think so.
Anarchy everywhere.
Yeah. It's like, I'm bigger than you.
Yeah.
And this is where all the, and I won't go on this deep of a tangent, but like, this speaks so much to our society is a construct.
Hmm.
Government's a construct. Rules are a construct. These things don't exist. They
Mm-mm.
only exist because we give power to them.
We agree to follow them. It's a
Yeah.
social contract. Yeah.
And the idea of like, I'm going to quote Futurama here because I love this quote. There's these aliens and they're watching Friends, and they're
Mhm.
just like, why is Ross the biggest friend, not just eat the other friends? And it's the kind of thing where it's just like, this book is that in a nutshell. It's
Yep.
just like, because government gives power to those who generally wouldn't have power
Hmm.
in a like
In
a
a nutshell.
in
Yeah.
a like a more stripped down kind of situation. But the thing is, it's either physical force or charisma is going to get people to follow you.
Hmm.
And the physical force obviously is what's getting this one shit kid who's ruling the hunters some power here, because like he's the biggest kid
Yeah.
and he uses his force on people, and they got food, and it's like they hunted down a boar.
Hmm.
But it's so fascinating because it's way too close to home in so many different ways, but it's still relevant, and it's 2022, and I'm pretty sure this book was written in like 54.
Yeah.
So
You're
like,
right. That's a, it's an older, very older story, but yeah, still, I would totally agree. Very relevant.
what's that like 60 67 years ago,
Yep.
something like that. Don't like that. But like, it's why they still teach it in school. There's something about it, still works. But I think we've had a nice, interesting variety of books here, and also some very interesting conversations getting deep and heavy on a Tuesday night.
For real. But it was so good. This is what books are for.
Exactly. And I can guarantee you, Aaron will be back and we'll be doing more of these little countdowns of books. But Aaron, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.